Thanks for joining us for Churches Need Saving 2. We're coming to you from Faith Church in Houston, Texas. I'm Micah Simecek, partner with Studio Red Architects, a boutique architecture firm in Houston, Texas, focusing mostly on churches and religious nonprofit institutions. I'm joined by Nathan Rouse.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Rouse, lead pastor here at Faith Church, and it's a pleasure to be able to be with you and talk about this really helpful topic when it comes to church design.
So the reason that we put this presentation together is there's a lot of value for churches that are not necessarily looking to double the size of their facilities, not necessarily looking to relocate, but churches that have a lot of great resources and benefits in the facilities that they currently have. But one of the risks that they may be encountering is how do they modernize? How do they attract the visitors and retain the membership of the churchgoers that they have? One of the risks that most churches have that are in this case is they don't modernize and they find themselves lacking the opportunities to expand their ministries and engage the congregation in a meaningful way. We're going to use Faith Church here in Houston as a case study to go through very similar points that we applied in this project that Nathan and I worked together on. And we're going to use some of our experiences through that project to relay to churches that may be in a similar position. We want to communicate different things and points that can be used for projects that you may be looking at. It's part of the agenda that we're going to talk about today. We're really going to hit three main points. We're going to talk about the why renovate, what is some of the backstory that churches, especially Faith Church, have encountered that may be beneficial to the congregation joining us today, as well as the how. How did we go about this particular project, and what are some of the points that your church could follow through? And the end game, of course, is the results. What happened? What were the benefits of going through that effort? And we'll cover that today through today's presentation. So Nathan, tell us a little bit about how the church started in the vision process and the background that led you to the project.
Sure. Well, first let me say I'm biased for our church. We have a wonderful, beautiful church family, multicultural, multi-generational, just a beautiful church family. But as I stepped into the role in the summer of 2017, there were ongoing questions about what the future of the church was. Obviously, new lead pastor, they were wanting direction, wanting leadership. And of course, obviously, one of the conversations that came up was where the facility was. We're a church that's congregation's over 50 years old. The building itself was built around 1980. And so we had a facility that was really hurting. And I'm not just talking about carpet and paint. I'm talking about it was fatigued in many, many ways. We had issues of just a poor setup, maybe a church that was designed for a previous use model for the church back in the day, but it really wasn't what we thought and dreamed that it could be. And so we had wrestled with the challenge, the idea potentially of, do we need a new building? And as we thought more about that and began to dialogue about it, we began to wrestle with some of the stewardship questions you mentioned earlier about new building versus renovation. And we just felt like from a stewardship standpoint, what can we do to allow these stewardship dollars to go further? And so we began to think about what would a massive renovation look like beyond just carpet and paint. How could we take a leap into the future? And so we began to see what else is out there. We began to travel to some other locations around the country and see some other church locations that were doing some things that we like, that were maybe relevant to our times, that had a modern feel, that still felt like a family feel. How can we set up a more intimate setting in various areas? And so it was then that we began to reach out to some architect firms in the Houston area, interviewed about 4 or 5 firms, and we began to, what's the kind of partnership we want, what would look like. We talked to a couple of national firms, but we felt like we wanted an intimate partnership with a company that was here in Houston, some that would walk along the journey and not be flying into town every now and then just to be with us. And so as we began to interview and ask questions, Studio Red you guys really kind of became the cream at the top because, Micah, even you specifically, you were asking questions, and maybe it's because you guys work so well with churches who have had that experience in the past. You guys asked the right questions. We knew by using some of the verbiage and vernacular, your own faith journey, it allowed that bled over into the design conversations, the talk of, and you got the heartbeat of what we wanted. And even when I was willing to put it out there, hey, can we take a bold risk? Can we put it out there? Let's do something amazing. And you were able to say, hey, let's do it.
Yeah. Tell us about some of the stewardship steps that you took as a congregation and leadership that led you to the project.
Sure. Well, obviously, you're always asking yourself, hey, what can we afford to do? We didn't want pie in the sky and then not be able to execute. But we began to do the normal things that we do. What can we afford? What is the giving capacity of our congregation? What can we actually pull off? And then we began to cast vision for the future with our leadership team and begin to circle them up, the elder board, the deacons, and then, of course, other expanding rings of influence in the church. And as we did that, there became a beautiful response. People wanted to be able to be proud of their facility, one that they'd be proud to invite friends, family, coworkers to. And they began to catch hold of the dream. And that led to vision being received, them being champions of the vision, and really ultimately moving to a place where financially we were able to pull off and take this challenge on.
Right. And the conversations about stewardship bled over to some of our initial conversations in the design phases and really set into motion some of the key decisions for renovation versus new construction. One of the things that we talked about, but that most churches find as they go on this journey is that you can basically get twice as much in renovation as you can in new construction. Boiling that down, renovation costs are half what a new building would cost if you were trying to rebuild the same square footage, or flipping it on its end, you can renovate twice as much square footage as you could if you were trying to rebuild it new. And that was certainly something that we looked at on this project, but would apply to any church project. If you're looking at how to manage the refresh or repositioning of facilities, you may have some good bones in the facility that you currently have. Certainly because it's built off of stewardship of the prior generations, which was the case here at Faith Church, and ongoing continuation of that heritage and history. But also, quite frankly, you've got a lot of the infrastructure in place that doesn't need to be repurchased between the structure and the shell of the building. There's a lot of costs that can be avoided simply by keeping some of those things in place. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that affected the church here at Faith Church and the decisions that we made there. So let's talk a little bit about what we did on this particular project here at Faith Church and how some of these principles and renovation projects were applied through the process. A little bit of background about the building. As Nathan mentioned a moment ago, the original building was built in 1980. It's roughly 50,000 square feet, 2 stories. Most of the renovation of the project happened on the first floor, really impacting some key areas in terms of the existing building as well as what we transitioned those spaces to become. Key area that changed was the worship center. As Nathan mentioned a moment ago, we really took a bold step here because that space of any of the spaces that were impacted was really where we needed the most impact for the project and really modernizing and repositioning the space. The existing worship room was a long space, sat about 800 people in pew seating, had a large elevated stage that previously supported choir music and other things that were not being utilized in worship today. A bold step that we took was literally to turn the room 90 degrees so that the format of the space within the same rough shape was transitioned to place the stage along the long side of the room instead of the short side, and put the audience seating really in a half circle around that stage. One of the key things that did was bring the congregation so much closer to the speaker as well as to the worship team, promoting a much tighter density, which you could probably speak to as being the pastor.
It was such a radical change, not only just in the look, but the feel of the room, the relational feel from one with another. If you can imagine in a longer room, people are worshiping and they're focused toward the short end of the room. But now with a semicircle feel, people are not only seeing the platform, seeing the worship, seeing what's being led, but they can see one another. And so it brought this intimacy, and of course, as a communicator, being able to be that much closer to our people just brought the intimacy of the message. It just felt, this is right. It felt like family.
Right. We were able to make the room slightly smaller. We went from 800 seats at a max capacity to a comfortable 600, although the room can still expand up to 800 if you fill it all the way with seating. But in doing so, we were able to recapture about 30% of the footprint of the original space by making the platform more efficient and, of course, making the layout of the room much more intimate. So we were able to recapture that 30% in other areas. One of the key spaces that we hit on was fellowship as an idea that was lacking in the original building that we were able to promote in this space. The previous building had a small cafe area that was really kind of off the beaten path that we were able to reposition adjacent to the space that was previously the foyer. And we used that 30% of recaptured area to create a better layout of a cafe with some support space. Of course, we were able to integrate appliances for coffee and refreshments and drinks, and a much larger area to lay out food and things that would be offered. And the positioning of that within some of the recaptured area from the worship room directly adjacent to the foyer really allowed us to create a fellowship space that was more than just a stopping point on your way in and out of worship. It really became a draw for people to come early and stay late. Keeping them on campus longer would allow for people to engage in the community within the congregation and possibly lead to engagement in other ministry areas to be on campus more than just on a Sunday morning. Within the foyer space, we also created some movable partitions which allow for breakout zones and allow the foyer to be more than just an open space for people to gather. It also can function for educational and small groups, which was something that was lacking in the original building.
Yeah, it created all kinds of not only our life groups sessions where people are coming together to talk about next steps in their walk with God, but also from vision casting sessions with their staff to various staff meetings to counseling sessions sometimes with one-on-one people. It just became a really versatile space, and it was just innovative. Even people that come in from other churches, that's one of the first things they mention are the glass pods, and that's been a huge highlight.
Connecting that foyer space to other areas, we were able to recapture what was formerly some administrative offices, a small conference area, and a portion of the children's spaces into an elongated lobby space that connected the foyer fellowship zone with really all the main entrances to the building. So if you were a guest or you were a parishioner, somebody coming in, you had direct line of sight to where you wanted to go, connecting you to the worship spaces as well as to the cafe and fellowship, and opening up what was previously a very dark, disconnected space with natural light as well as seating areas for people to gather. That area also connects really the third component, main component of the renovation, which was an enhanced children's area. The second floor of the building is where most of the older children have their education and worship spaces, and that wasn't really affected by the renovation project. But the space for the younger kiddos, the birth through about age 2, was repositioned as part of the project and created in a larger, more flexible zone. We were able to segregate those age groups into 2 different areas, create a larger and confined check-in space so parents can bring their children into a space that they know the kid's not going to run off, and they can safely and comfortably pass over their belongings, get their child check in, and usher the child into the new space. All of this was happening within existing square footage of the building that was already there. There was no real addition or a new construction component, really just repositioning existing spaces into new. As far as the process, one of the key things that we started with, as Nathan mentioned, is a visioning process to really understand and conceptualize what are the big ticket goals, what do we want to try to achieve, and how do we implement that. We followed from a conceptual master planning stage through really 5 key components of design. Schematic design, which really creates the platform or spring point for all the different services. Design development, which really goes into key design decisions to nail down details about finishes, fixtures, and equipment. into construction documents, which are the actual drawings that need to be produced for permitting, as well as constructing the building with a contractor. We went into bidding and procurement, so a process of selecting contractors, getting bids, and ultimately the church going into contract with the winning proposer, and then ultimately construction, with architect being a team member even through that process with the contractor and the owner to oversee the construction process. Some of the key things that happen during that is really constant meeting and communication in order to maintain schedule, in order to maintain goals and desires and vision, as well as to overcome potential conflicts that come up, and they come up. Yeah. We'll talk about challenges and pitfalls in a moment. Through construction, as well as just working through key aspects of design. Nathan, do you have any thoughts on how that process worked for you guys?
Well, you guys drew out our heart on various things. You guys knew the questions to ask that we didn't know what we didn't know, and so as you guys asked that, you guys helped us put our personality into the design. You didn't run over us, which I really appreciated. I mean, every church family has a unique personality. You want your church, your building to tell a story. You want to serve and be a vital ministry tool for you, and so that design part is so crucial. And you don't get to do this very often, so we want it to be done well. And the partnership along the way drew out what we believe was our best effort, and we wanted to swing for the fences, and you guys helped us get there.
So one of the things, and we won't be able to cover all of them, but you're always going to come across challenges and pitfalls, especially in renovation projects. A few things that we encountered, we'll talk about, but the key part of it is trying to anticipate whatever you can as possible and understand through contingency and probably a little bit of patience that you're going to come across something that no one really could see. One of the things that was a challenge or a pitfall on really any renovation project, but it's certainly something that we encountered on Faith Church, is the unknown aspect. So you don't always know in an existing building, certainly those that are older where existing drawings may not be available, where the plumbing is, where the structure is, and some of those things. So one of the things that we did to get ahead of this is we did a full assessment of the building at an early stage. We got above the ceiling. We tried as best as we could to get into the walls where that was possible, and really try to understand where the infrastructure was and anticipate any potential issues that we needed to encounter. Another thing that most renovations, especially in older buildings, are going to encounter, and certainly we encountered on this one, is the potential for asbestos or any other kinds of hazardous materials. We got ahead of that on this project because we did engage a testing lab to come out and investigate, take some samples, and did lab work to confirm, fortunately for this project, that we did not have asbestos. But it is something that is a challenge, and had we come across that, we did have contingencies in place in the budget to go in and abate the asbestos material if it was required. Another aspect that we ran into that would be on any kind of renovation project dealing with older buildings is building codes. Whether you're building a new building or you're renovating, you're always going to be required to do that per the local jurisdiction's building codes. For us specifically on Faith Church, the challenge was we were working in an older building, and here in our local jurisdiction, which is Harris County, the rules are a little bit different and a little convoluted. But the key thing that we managed through this process is understanding what would be the trigger points of our project that may trigger other aspects of the code that may involve very costly and time-consuming infrastructure like fire sprinklers, fire alarm systems, and others. And so understanding that, working with the local jurisdiction, working with the church in terms of managing the expectations, right, we were able to deliver a project that met code, but allowed us to avoid some things that really could have been a detriment, possibly even a killing point, right, if you think about it, in terms of certain aspects of the project, and really translated to maximizing the ministry opportunities for the project. Yeah. Any pitfalls that you think that you saw we came across?
Well, I think obviously plumbing had been done previously by volunteers when the original design had been put together. We found some issues and things that need to be corrected. They weren't huge deals, but when they came up, thankfully we had contingency funds to kind of navigate and take care of those things. I think one other thing I would throw in is that us meeting as consistently as we did helped us navigate those challenges. And instead of things building up or a bunch of things that we had to navigate all at one time, we didn't allow it to snowball because we kept meeting, because we had a real specific timeline we needed to hit. There was a window. You guys know this in church world. There's a specific timeline when you need to hit certain things. End of spring and summer were our construction months, and we had a specific timeline when to nail. And those consistent meetings helped us stay on timeline and get in on schedule. Huge win.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that we encountered on this project, and it's certainly something to think about when renovating and refreshing, repurposing a space, is going to be how to handle technology. Obviously, the building being built in the 40 years ago, the technology and infrastructure that we had dates back to that same time period. And really enhancements that the church had taken over the years were really just applied to what you already had. They weren't really fully integrated.
Right.
You talked about some of those challenges you had just with how do you use this space for worship.
Yeah, it was kind of piecemealed over time. It wasn't bad, but it actually was bad. It was awful. By the time we got there, it was bad. But one of the main challenges, we had a very long, imagine a long gated room, the very end of the room, back behind a long, deep stage, a small screen, center screen. It just was not helpful. So one of the huge technology leaps we made was we made the screens, the visual component, that's just kind of a modern worship now. We had to step that up. And so we actually asked that you guys incorporate that into the design. So we went from a small, tiny middle screen in the back of this long sanctuary to this now robust, wide, 3 major screens set up in the sanctuary space that changed the ability for us to communicate in a more compelling way visually.
Sure.
Was a huge gift.
Sure. Well, and to that point, integrating that technology and the resources from an audio-video integrator early in the design process is critical for any project, but especially for a renovation project. In this case, the church had a relationship with an audio-video integrator that was brought to the table and really treated as a design team member, even though they were working directly with the church. And the architecture and engineering team pulled in that resource to finalize the layout of the worship platform, make sure the room was appropriately tuned for the acoustics, and incorporate the electrical and other infrastructure requirements, structural requirements needed in order to make sure that their systems were fully integrated into the project, so that the project, as it's being built, was doing so with all of those things already identified. A pitfall that can sometimes happen with technology is that those resources are brought in too late, which means you're really only working with what you have, and that may be applying things, just like in the previous space, applying things overlaid to work that's already been done, which really does not have a fully integrated feel. So in any project, but certainly renovation work, bringing in that resource early really can avoid challenges and budgetary pitfalls as the project continues. So Nathan, tell us a little bit about the results of the project afterward. What did the congregation, what's their feedback, and how did it affect the numbers?
Everything was amazing. I mean, when that launch Sunday, of course, Micah, you were there, was an amazing feel. Obviously, the room was packed. People were excited and thrilled. Our church family was, is there a godly way to be proud about, there was just a thrilling a win for the church family. If I'm talking to pastoral team members, I mean, from one of the metrics that we saw, which is a real immediate growth, probably about right away, about 10% bump in previous attendance. And that's been a gift too. It really gave us an opportunity to relaunch as a church, and reach and communicate to people and get people on campus that normally, or maybe that have driven by our church for years, come take a fresh look at our church family, and we've been able to see a lot of those families plug in and be a part. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. Talk about some of the ministry opportunities that you were able to engage in after the project was complete.
Yeah, immediately our life groups kind of went to another level because we had these new spaces, and not only were they great, but our people wanted to request them. Our life groups wanted to be in them, not just on Wednesday nights, but even in various other areas. Cafe ministry was a gift. More people hanging out, more people spending time in the concourse foyer in the cafe area. I would also say this, is that we also had an opportunity to do a marriage retreat on campus. And we kind of put away the glass pods. It expanded that space, and that really kind of highlighted the multifunction design we wanted in all of our spaces. But that marriage conference was a gift, so we've done a lot of different banquets and vision casting for various leadership meetings in that space. It's been awesome to have to highlight that multifunction aspect.
Right. Well, and to that point, you now have the worship space, but then you're using the foyer fellowship area as another venue for these types of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Unfortunately, to that, the impact of COVID-19, of course, is on the topic of everybody's mind, and there's been some adaptation that the church has had to make in order to accommodate that. Tell us a little bit about what COVID-19 has done in terms of how you're using the facility now.
Sure. Well, you mentioned prior to the AV integration, we had made some huge leaps prior last fall, which set us up, and we're just grateful for this, set us up to be ready for the audio-visual, the technology integration we needed to go virtual for a time. And so that was a huge win for us. The other thing, that multifunction design aspect helped us create spaces that could expand, that could do some various different things, whether that was shooting virtually in different spaces to broadcast and minister in various spaces around the church. But also even with, because we've had to have social distancing in the sanctuary, that's kind of expanded what we could, or expanded and had to adjust what we could do. So we've had an overflow space. So we put away maybe the glass walls out in the foyer and allowed to have a really nice overflow space for a live feed to be pumped in for when we can't fit everybody in the sanctuary because of social distancing. So that's been a gift.
So are you back to in-person worship?
Yeah, we've been back for about a month now. And obviously I know those of you who are watching are navigating those challenges as well. But our people are beginning to lean back in and it's been good.
Are you able to do live stream as well as the?
Yeah, we're doing both. Yeah, we're doing both now, knowing that a good portion of our congregation is still at home, remaining safely at home, and we understand that. So we've tried to not make people feel better or worse whether they come or they're staying at home. Allowing them to kind of make that decision. But we didn't want the broadcast of the online service to be any less than that somehow they were the stepchild and the experience they were getting. So the fact that we're able to have that integration of the service, it's allowed us to minister in a more compelling way than what it was before, for sure.
How do you see, of course, we don't all have a crystal ball with COVID-19, but how do you see the possibility of worship changing as we move forward?
Well, I think, where some churches potentially have been maybe virtual or maybe having online experience, I think now we know every church has to see that as that's here to stay. We're also looking to continue to grow and expand what we might even do in our sanctuary spaces as we look to the future, where we don't just wait for life groups to happen another day. That multifunction in the sanctuary, people could potentially break out into life groups will be a gift, I think, to us potentially in the future. We want to continue to see our cafe to become an ongoing third space, not just on Sundays, but even throughout the week, to be a place people in our community can come, grab a great cup of coffee, spend some time with one another. We feel like that could be a gift to the community as well.
Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you spending some time with us today here at Faith Church here in Houston, Texas, talking about churches need saving too. We want to offer a couple of ways that you could take the conversation deeper. One way, we'll provide a link to Before the Brick, which is a resource that Studio Red has put together specifically for churches that may be in a position that you're in, looking at how to get started, both in terms of renovation projects as well as new construction. And what are some financial and feasibility guidelines that you can apply in your decision-making process. Studio Red, we are a resource to any church, and certainly want to make that offer to you. You can find us both through contact information you'll find here in Before the Brick, but also on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and others. Another resource that we're going to make available is a handout that has high points, bullet points from today's discussion that also can be something that you could take back to your leadership councils and other staff just to get the conversation going and how what you've learned and heard from our experiences here at Faith Church that can apply to you and your own church.
I'd also make the invitation to you, if you're ever in Houston, would like to check out the space personally, we'd love to have you come and join us. Doesn't even have to necessarily be on a Sunday. If you want to stop by during the week, we're available to you. put a name with a face. Also, if you'd like to hear more, if I can be a resource to you, just hearing more about our story, coming alongside Studio Red and the whole journey of renovation, I want to allow us to be a resource to you as well. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as well. So feel free to look me up. I'd love to connect with you.
Well, thank you again. We appreciate you joining us for Churches Need Saving Too. We appreciate your time together. We certainly look forward to future conferences where we can put hand in hand, face-to-face meet. But until then, we hope that you stay safe and stay well, and look forward to meeting again in the future. Thank you.